Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Ed Wolcoff, and he's going to talk to us about his book, Special Reconnaissance and Advanced Small Unit Patrolling. Thank you for joining us. Some of these, I read your book, and that's a lot of information. For people that don't know, it's about this thick. So don't test me on those things today, okay? All right. So when you were in Special Forces stateside and you arrived in Vietnam and you actually had your first experience with SOG, were there training aspects that you felt had no application that were completely not useful?
This will amaze you, uh, but everybody who is coming into FOB2, and I assume all the other FOBs, who are going to be assigned to reconnaissance or to uh, the hatchet forces, was required to go to the 1-0 course at Long Tan, which is the Special Forces school. They taught more than just the 1-0 course, but for the Americans, that was requisite. However, they forgot to send me. I went directly to a team, uh, and was assigned to a RT New York. And at that time, the team had just come off a bad operation. Uh, the team leader had gotten killed. Um, pardon me. And the 1-1, who was the assistant team leader, he had gotten badly wounded and had to be medevac. So that left one guy remaining from the original team who had been the radio man. And for a reason that I can't divine, he was promoted to team leader. Um, Now, he had served with the 173rd and he claimed to have had recon experience with the 173rd. So that was probably the reason why they said, all right, you've got experience and we need people with experience in charge of teams. So you get RT New York. But he turned out to be god awful. He was just horrible. Uh, we rarely trained. When we go to the range, rather than running immediate action drills or battle drills, it was just shoot your weapon, pack up, and go back to the FOB and chill out. Uh, I won't even mention his name, but uh, he was relieved from his position before we ever got on the ground on a mission. Uh, and my the team then had the team leader who had left. So the next guy in line was the assistant team leader, whose name was John St. Martin. Great guy. Montagnards loved him, but he had very little experience on the ground. I don't think he had more than a couple of missions. This is again mystifying to me because there was generally a protocol for promoting somebody into a team leader position. Uh, at any rate, he was given the team leader position on a qualified basis. Um, and he took the team out on an operation, which broke my cherry, so to speak. And we had with us the company commander for Recon Company, who was strap hanging, and another guy who was strap hanging, who was the team leader designee. So St. Martin realized that this was going to be his time to shine, or I mean, it really didn't make any difference because somebody was already designated to replace him. This was another guy who had been from the 173rd, who had claimed to have prior reconnaissance experience, and he had not gone to 10, of course, and he was just really, really bad. And I won't mention his name either. Uh, but so I learned my trade by observing other people's mistakes and the things that they did wrong and that I had sworn never to repeat and not copy that. But I never went to 10 course. It turns out that this second team leader was also relieved, this time by the FOB commander, while we were at the launch site and told to board the helicopters to launch. And he declined to board the helicopter and go on the operation. And the FOB commander came down and personally came to the launch site and relieved him on the spot. And then turned to John St. Martin and said, "Can you take the team?" St. Martin looked at me. I nodded. We decided we would go on the operation shorthanded. And St. Martin then became the official team leader, even though he had fairly scant experience. By then, I think he may have had a maximum of, not including Long Ton 10 course, I think he maybe had 2 operations under his belt. I could be wrong. Very courageous fellow. And I learned from him what I could from the things that he did right, and I learned from him the things that he did wrong. And that was how I got educated. We went on maybe 5, 6 operations together, and he got shot up pretty badly on an operation, which is a tale in itself. And then because of my performance during that operation, I was elevated to the team leader position. Then I was thrust into the fire, and I had to learn by doing. So had I been assigned to another team that had an experienced team leader, that would have been a blessing for me. And I survived largely because of the Montagnards and their skills in the field, and exceptionally good luck. There's a saying, it's better to be lucky than good. And I was extraordinarily lucky. I walked through several kill zones, ambush kill zones, and survived, not a shot fired for various reasons. I was sent on what I would consider suicide missions and, survived and, escaped fate. And every mission I went on, I learned more and more. And when I came back, I internalized those things, both the things that I did correctly and well, and the things that I did poorly. And I would go to sleep at night after coming back from an operation. and dream about the consequences of doing those things wrong and what I needed to do to correct those. And then the following day, I go out and I'd start training my team again to correct those problems. I would go to sleep that way. I would wake up that way, dreaming about the operation, what went right, what went wrong, and I implemented change to correspond. And that's how I learned. That's how I became a successful team leader.
Very, very fortunate that you're here to be able to talk to us, with that kind of
Oh, you have no idea.
So what would be, again, I mean, as you did already, no names mentioned, but what would be, your book is massive and but what would you say are the top errors that you saw? What can be very costly mistakes from oversights or, maybe being confident or something? What are the top five or top six or whatever? Like, what did you see?
I don't think anybody was overconfident. We had a horrendous casualty rate uh, in the FOB. And so I don't think there was anybody who was overconfident. Uh, some of the chief lessons, uh, errors that I saw that amounted to casualties were varied. So, for instance, uh, the and these are encompassed in my book, but there was a kind of a routine that we used at FOB2, and I assume that it was used at the other FOBs as well. A 4-week cycle. The first week, you got your warning order, and then you went to the S2 shop, the intelligence shop, and you studied the target folder, and then you received your maps. And then you went and you gave your warning order to the Americans on your team, distributed the maps. Now, when you received your map as the team leader at the S2 shop, you took information from the target folder, such as trails that were found, enemy installations that were known to be there, these kind of things that were not found on the map because the map would be overage and not up to date, where minefields might be, and these kind of things. And you updated your map, marked those on your map. When you brought the maps for your team members, they copied your map onto their maps, basically the enemy information. The other thing that you did, like the following day from your warning order, if possible the following day, was you took a VR, a visual reconnaissance. And I had a specific protocol for that because I didn't want to tip off the enemy that I was coming into their area. So a target area for FOB2 was a 6 by 6 kilometer box. And so my protocol, I would discuss this with the pilot, and I'd say what altitude you go into the area, how to fly, what I wanted, key points that I wanted to see. I had already designated areas that I wanted to investigate for landing zones. And then he flew the course. Based on that information, the information I picked up from the target folder and from the map study that I'd done, I designed a course of action based on that plus what the mission happened to be. So if it was a POW snatch or an area reconnaissance or point, a road watch or something like that, that all that fed the concept of operations. So that was week one. And during week one, um, you you went to the range, you rehearsed your immediate action drills based on your concept of operations. You re-equipped with any special equipment that you might want, and you went and you practiced with that. Week two, what do I say? Week one ended with a brief back to brief the commander about your concept of operations, and it was, fairly short and sweet. I have to emphasize that this 4-week cycle was very streamlined. They wisely, the commander of the FOB compelled his staff to be supportive of the teams and give them what they wanted, what they needed. The team leader generally was not challenged. If he wanted a certain piece of equipment, if he wanted, a certain amount of ammunition for training, he got it. Now there were some problems with staff that I can go into at a later point. But I have to say that everything was very streamlined. If you needed something from the supply room, all you had to go there would be a form with a listing of all the equipment and supplies, and all you had to do is enter a quantity and check and hit a checkbox. Then you would submit that form for your training during week one, and then week two, when you were about to launch on an operation, you submitted, after your training was complete, you submitted the real load of ammunition and weapons and things like that. Again, another check sheet, very streamlined, not complicated, eased the burden on the team leader. So then you entered an intensive training period, and then week two was when you went to the launch site to launch on your operation. That too is very streamlined. Week three, you came back from your operation and you had stand down. And then week four was the duty cycle, which was you would do repair bunkers, you would do external patrols around the FOB, but it was another opportunity for you to train your team and to do those, take those corrective measures that you'd identified during the course of your operation. So 4-week cycle. St. Martin said, we don't need that duty cycle. And he and I went over to see the first sergeant, the company commander, and said, rather than give us a duty cycle, why don't we just make it a 3-week cycle for R2 New York and just get right back into the bush, back into the bush, and back into the bush. So we had an accelerated up tempo as compared to other teams. I don't know any other team that did that, but we did that. Does that
Yeah.
answer
Yeah.
the question?
So what I guess just going back to my question would be like, was there
uh,
one common error that you saw or heard teams did, and it was very, very costly. Whether
Yeah.
it be leaving, a food, wrapper behind, or talking, or having a cigarette, which I know, I mean, no one did, I'm sure.
None of
So
that happened,
yeah, yeah.
but I think a common error was taking an azimuth to your target and walking the azimuth. You had to use evasive techniques because you always had trackers. And as soon as they determined that you were on an azimuth, they could put a blocking force in front of you and come up behind you with the enemy tracker team or pursuit team and trap you in a box, and then it was over. You know, so you had to use dog legs, or you had to use what I call terrain hopping. There were some teams that did not understand that, uh, and and they got caught. I'm convinced of it, and I know it happened because I saw it happen. uh, and so that's one example of a common mistake. um,
Now here's a question for you. Off air, we were talking about tactics. So we know that some of the real world learning curve of you guys when you went back to the States, or when you became a teacher there at the 1-0 school, that they were attempting to teach the new students what they had just learned. But who was teaching the NVA? How were they able to adapt and learn? Was that from Russian advisors, or what was that?
okay, that's a very good question. So the NVA really had their roots in World War II in fighting the Japanese. And they picked up some tactics and techniques from the Japanese uh, and applied them with their own particular flavor. So, for instance, the Japanese built all kinds of underground facilities and bunker complexes. They were just like termites or ants. They were incredible. And North Vietnamese and the VC copied that. They also used the Japanese tactics. And here's an interesting thing that tags on to the last question you had, which is in 1-0 course, to include the one that I was an instructor in, they did not teach enemy tactics. They only taught uh, your own immediate action drills. The battle drills that you were used, but they didn't teach enemy tactics. So that was another area where I had to learn by experience about the enemy tactics that the enemy used. And the NVA used the exact same tactics that the Japanese used in the jungles of Southeast Asia.
Wow. So if you, I'm not sure in your career with SOG that you ever met up with any Chinese troops. Did you ever encounter them? And they, I'm sure, would have different MO, or different operation tactics than the World War II Japanese, or
No, the World War II Chinese had the same tactics that the Japanese did.
oh wow,
It was an so the uh, there is a Marine Corps officer whose name evades me right now, who was assigned as an observer with Mao Zedong's uh, fight against the Japanese during World War II, early on, before we had even entered the fight. And the Chinese were using 9-man squads. So this officer internalized those kind of things, and he became uh, a Marine Raider after the start of the war. And he used 9-man squads, using the same tactics that the Chinese were using. And the 9-man squads, the Marines at that point were using 8-man squads at the start of the war. They migrated to a 9-man squad after observing the tactics employed by then a lieutenant colonel. But enemy tactics, no one taught me enemy tactics. I had to observe those, and the enemy tactics that the Japanese used, Vietnamese used, the Chinese used, and the Chinese are still using, favored single and double envelopment. In other words, flanking maneuvers. It was automatic. You had a point contact, boom. It was their immediate action drill was a flanking maneuver based on terrain. So if the terrain allowed, then you would have a double flanking maneuver. If it didn't, then you would opt for a single flanking maneuver, always flanking to the high ground. And when the war started in the Pacific, and the Japanese invaded Papua New Guinea, the Australians did not have an understanding of these tactics and really took a bloody nose as a result of that. Took high casualty rates, very high. For that reason, because they didn't know the tactics that the enemy were using, and for other reasons, which they were not trained for jungle operations, which is strange given that they come from that corner of the world, the island chains of the Indo-Pacific, but they were not trained for jungle warfare. Anyway.
Wow, talk about old school. I guess if it works, right? It must have worked because all you saw guys that I've talked to, respected the NVA. The VC was something completely different. There's no.
Oh, they spent years in the jungle.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you left a trace, by crossing a danger area like a trail, it would pop up like a Burma shave sign on the side of a highway to them. They would notice it because that was their environment. They would see something out of place, an anomaly, and they say, "Oh, what's this?"
Yeah.
So then the alarm would go out.
Yeah.
So you had to have tactics and techniques to cope with that kind of a thing. And they were extremely disciplined. Unbelievably so. You would come across a trail that would be well used. We call them high-speed trails. And there wouldn't be a leaf or a twig on it. You could walk for a kilometer and not see any debris on the trail.
Wow.
You wouldn't see any tracks on the trail unless there was a stream, tributary crossing the high-speed trail. You wouldn't see any of that. I encountered a truck park. It was enormous, covered by canopy, not a leaf or a twig on it, flat as a pool table, no tracks of vehicles. They had raked it all over. It was just incredible. They had what was called bin trams, which were way stations that were every 25 kilometers along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And at each bin tram, they had a fleet of trucks. So a truck would come down from the next bin tram up towards North Vietnam, coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, stop at the next bin tram, offload all their stuff, and it was reloaded on the trucks that were established at the new bin tram. And that went on and on and on. Every 25 miles, they would transfer cargo to another truck. This was so that the driver did not have knowledge of all the locations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, along the highways and the roads. In the event that he got captured, he could only disclose, and none of these guys had maps. They just drove where they were told to drive. So there was impossible to get decent information out of a POW, a driver. So they were extremely disciplined and extremely cautious. They were really exceptional soldiers, and I had a friend who was a really outstanding team leader at FOB2, who later joined an intelligence agency and was employed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I asked him for his assessment of the enemy there as compared to the enemy he had faced in Vietnam and in Laos. And he said, no, well, they were very courageous, he said, of the Muslims, and sacrificed their lives willingly, but they were in no way could they be compared to the North Vietnamese as a fighting force.
Wow. Now, as a bit of a sidestep here, because I found this really intriguing. We talked about this off air as well. And as you mentioned, Iraq and different cultures. Can we just talk about how important it is when you're, like, say, a guy from the States, from maybe a farming village or something, or like a city, and then you go and your tour is in somewhere completely different where cultures can be different. Now, with the Montagnards, for men to hold hands is not considered unusual. Doesn't mean that you're gay. It's just a sign of friendship. Now, there's other things as well that you have to be aware of with different cultures. So, are there other things that you can think about that you have to be, cognitive of when you're serving with, Montagnard?
There were several things. So to us, when you're nodding, that means that you're in agreement typically with what's being said or what you're seeing before you. And when you shake your head, it says you're not in agreement. That's not the case with Montagnards.
Really?
And Orientals. It's the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, not all Orientals, I
Okay.
suspect, but certainly the Montagnards. Also, Montagnards thought it was rude and disrespectful to make eye contact with a superior. To us, that's a distrustful behavior, evasive and Uh, and it could be a little troubling to an American uh, when he's trying to get information from one of his own Montagnards, and he won't meet his eye, and you think that he's being deceptive, and it's not necessarily that he's deceptive; it's just that he's being courteous.
Wow. And not to do with a cultural thing, but it is sort of a cultural thing. I've heard from numerous saw guys that Monty-Yard men didn't really have the ability or knowledge of how to throw something. We're always used to throwing a baseball or throwing a rock, and when you were teaching them to throw like a grenade, there was a bit of a fear factor, right?
Oh, absolutely. So uh, you could load a Montagnard up very heavily. He could carry more equipment than an American could in some cases. And these were guys who were about two-thirds the size, the height of an American. But their upper body strength was appalling. They just didn't have it. They didn't do push-ups. They didn't do chin-ups or anything like that. They didn't have, an developed upper torso, which became a problem when you had to evacuate somebody who was wounded, particularly if he was an American who weighed far more than a Montagnard did. And I learned that lesson the hard way, and then took steps that when we went out and practiced immediate action drills, I would have them have a guy fall down and pretend as though he had been wounded and do a casualty uh, evacuation. Very few teams actually practiced that, which was amazing to me based on my own experience because we had such a high casualty rate. Uh, but that was another one of the things that, was not, I can't say that it wasn't taught at the course that I was teaching at Camp McCall. So then I assumed that it wasn't taught at Longton either, which is crazy.
Yeah, I just, and like you said, I mean, the size difference of a 6 foot tall American, if there's a 125-pound man who's attempting to carry him, that's not going to be good for the big guy, right?
Well, some of the guys who are in recon, a few of them were, I mean, you would favor people small in stature for reconnaissance uh, rather than really big guys. So we had some really huge guys volunteer for recon, and there's no way they could have been evacuated
Yeah.
had they been wounded. As a matter of fact, and they made excellent targets for the enemy because they were so large. They realized they were vulnerable, but they volunteered anyway, to their credit.
Uh, Now I pause, and you can of course say no. But you had a friend, Fat Albert. Um, can we talk about him a bit? Is that okay, or would you rather not?
Sure.
Okay. So I've heard a lot about him, but and I've seen a few pictures. He seemed to be a very colorful guy, and I know the bar and uh, what was going on in the bar and what it offered and all that kind of stuff. But what was he like as a guy?
He was great. Uh, Always upbeat. Uh, and he had a girlfriend down the village who ran a bar with a couple girls who were available, if you catch my drift. And he was good to be around, and he was smart. And he was his MOS was operations and intelligence. He was overweight, significantly overweight, uh, but he was value added to my team. Um, and after he'd been with RT New York for a while, uh, they gave him his own team. He had been on probably 6 ops, and they gave him his own team. Uh, this is kind of a sad story, so I just want to. I'm not going to hold anything back here, but when I went on leave, he was able to take my team in the team leader position, which was basically what you might call the qualifier for him to take his own team. And after that, I can't remember the name of his team, but he had one mission that was successful. And then he was given another mission, which was high profile, so to speak. And the task was that there was information indicating that there was a POW compound in southeastern Laos. And it was his job to pinpoint it and identify it for a raid by a hatchet force to rescue prisoners. So he decided on a course of action. I didn't confer with him on any of this. It was his mission, and he didn't have to confer with me. But he wanted to dress his troops up in NVA costume entirely. Pith helmets. Everybody was carrying an AK-47 and the chest rig and NVA uniform, and I think they even had bata boots, which were the NVA footgear. He did not take a visual reconnaissance, an overflight, because he didn't want to tip off the enemy. And I have to admit that I never taught him how to take a VR that avoided that problem. It just never occurred to me. I did explain it to my guys at some point, but I'm not sure they internalized it about the precautions that I took to not tip off the enemy. But anyway, he decided not to take a VR. So he did everything necessary, and he gave his brief back to the FOB commander and knocked his socks off. The FOB commander was just like, wow, this is a superb briefing. And Pete Wilson, Fat Albert, was an extremely intelligent guy. So he invites, the FOB commander invites the chief of ground operations from SOG headquarters to come down and see this briefing. And because he thought it was so well done, he invited all the team leaders on the FOB to come and also see the briefing, to educate themselves on how to thoroughly prepare for an operation, and and brief and do a brief back. So he starts briefing, and you have to understand the way the briefing room is set up. It's got tiered seating, different elevations, chairs arranged kind of like in a semicircle or a crescent, and facing the podium. And behind the podium was this massive map on the wall that showed the entirety of the area of operations for FOB2. And on the side wall, there was also a wall map for the Cambodian area of operations we also were responsible for. So starts talking and he points to the map where he's going to land, where his LZ is going to be, and and on from there about how he's going to move towards the area of interest and all this kind of stuff. And I'm shocked because I knew that area. I'd been in that area before. He had not. And the exact area that he was pointing to on the map was where an enemy road was. During previous briefings, I'd gone in and the map had reflected that road. It had been drawn in with grease pencil because it was an old map. I mean, the map was covered with plastic sheets, 1/4 inch plastic sheets, or even thicker than 1/4 inch. So it wasn't something they were going to undo the plastic sheeting and take it all down and replace it with newer maps. That was never going to happen. So it was up to them to either mark on the plastic sheets the changes that had occurred in the area of operations, or they would have overlays and to paste over the plastic sheets indicating the enemy situation. But that markup had disappeared. So after the briefing was over, the colonel gets up and he says, "This is so great, so well prepared. I am convinced that this operation is going to be a resounding success." The chief of ground operations, whose name was Colonel Shungle, he was very pleased with the briefing. And so I went up to him after the briefing was over, and I said, "There's a road there, right?" And he looked back at the map and says, "No, there's not." I said, "Yes, there is. There's a road there. I've been there. There's a road there. You need to choose a second LZ, your alternate LZ, away from the trace of the road." I traced it on the map with my finger. He denied that there was a road there. This is an O&I guy, operations intelligence guy. So that kind of response was remarkable to me. And he said, "There's no road there, and there's the target folder on the podium, and it doesn't depict any road there." And I looked at the target folder, and I immediately detected the problem. It was an old folder. It had been archived. It wasn't the current folder. And I pointed it out to him. I said, "This is not the right folder." And I showed him the inclusive dates that were on the folder tab. And he looked embarrassed. His face got flushed. I said, "You need to change. It's not a problem to use your alternate LZ." He refused to do so. I'm going to conduct the operation as I briefed it, which boggled my mind. It shows that I didn't know him well enough, frankly, to gauge that stubbornness in him. At any rate, I was so distressed about this that I went to the company commander, who at that time was Captain Bob Howard, probably the most famous recon guy in all of SOG. And I told him about the problem. And I said he had been Our S2 shop had given him the wrong folder, which is a problem in itself. And I said, I begged him to go and talk Wilson out of this, this concept of operations. He went over and talked to him, and Fat Albert refused to change his primary LZ. So sadly, it was kind of an interesting sidebar here. I was sent up to the to the to the launch site to be the bright light team when he was inserted on the operation. So it was my responsibility to go in and rescue him if he got into trouble as a bright light team leader. Within a day, he was dead, and so was one of his Montagnards. He had they walked right into an ambush. One of his Montagnards got shot, his point man. He helped this point man who was, sorely wounded, and he lagged behind the rest of the team. His assistant team leader failed in his responsibilities by not checking on him, looking behind. Fat Albert directed him, go directly to the stream valley where there's an LZ, and we'll get out of here. So he took off, moving with the rest of the team, and they did not look behind. Fat Albert lagged behind because of his weight and the guy that he was carrying. And the enemy caught up with him and drilled him. So the rest of the story is that the rest of that team had gotten extracted in late afternoon. And the team landed, the rest of the team landed on the launch site. And the assistant team leader came up to me and was in tears, accepting responsibility for not doing a count of the team. And I calmed him down. I said, don't worry, we're going to go in and rescue him. Darkness was approaching. It was too late in order for an insertion. So let's go back, talk this over. You're going to come with me and the bright light team, and we're going to retrace our steps from the extraction LZ and find Fat Albert. So that calmed him down, and he was satisfied with that. But the problem was that I got a radio message from the FOB telling me to come back to the FOB immediately. And I said, I was going to come back anyway. And I said, what's the problem? And they said, you're not in the Army anymore. I had missed my ETS. I was past my term of service.
Wow.
And I didn't even realize it. And I was actually a civilian at that point. So they had to pull me back, and they had to do some magic with the paperwork to post-date my reenlistment. But that took time to get through the bureaucratic mill. Meanwhile, they had to designate another team to go in and try and rescue Fat Albert. And all they found was a blood trail. His body and the body of the Montagnard was, missing. So you have to be willing to, adapt to a changing situation. And he didn't. Uh, and I told Bob Howard, I told him, let me go and talk to the colonel and try and, you know, get this, at least go to an alternate LZ. And Bob Howard said, no, I'm not going to let you do that. It's it's Pete's decision. He's the 1-0. He's going to make the call. And I just, shook my head. All right. And I have to say that Bob acknowledged that I was right, and he found it hard to meet my eye after it became clear that, Pete had gotten killed.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that story. I know that 50 years plus, those memories are not easy to shift. So thank you for that. Um, yeah. Um, Going back to your book, if people want to buy your book, can they get it on like Amazon and stuff? Or
Absolutely. It's available in hardback, paperback, audio, and digital. And of course, the digital version is the uh, the cheapest
and it's a
version.
big book. So I mean for somebody who wants to know all about basically what you learned and the good and the bad, it's all in there. And even for even if it's there, there's a lot of information in there. It's good. It would be good for everybody. Now, one question that I had for you was that with all the learnings that you had and you've spent, I don't know how many, that must have taken you a couple of years to write that book, right?
A
Now,
lot of research.
I would hope that those tried and tested applications are currently being taught to the US Special Forces or, the more advanced SpecOps guys. Is that the case?
It's not. Uh, the operations that we ran in SOG uh, were exempt from the normal declassification schedule. They retained their clearance, their security classification well beyond the norm. Uh, and then when they were considering declassification of it after 25 years or so, uh, instead of declassifying it and using this as a record of lessons learned, they destroyed all the records. Not only did they destroy the records of the operations, they also destroyed the program of instruction at a Longtan for the 1-0 course and all the other courses that they taught. Uh, and so I mentioned to you that I had been assigned as an instructor at the reconnaissance course at Camp McCall. That was designated as a successor program for the one in Longtan because around the time frame that I left, the United States was withdrawing from Vietnam. And they were going to close down the Longtan facility. But they were still, but SOG under another cover name was going to continue operations within South Vietnam. No more cross-border operations. But they still needed troops to conduct the mission. So that was the purpose of the reconnaissance committee at Camp McCall. So I was there for a couple of cycles as an instructor, and then was uh, sent to operations and intelligence course to pick up another MOS that was appropriate to special reconnaissance, which was O&I was, you know, what you were doing is intelligence gathering and analysis in recon, special reconnaissance. By the time I got returned from that course, they had closed down the reconnaissance course at Camp McCall and destroyed all the program of instruction there as well. Gone. Well, I was mighty concerned about that. I said, because not only is special reconnaissance a core mission of special forces, but it's also supporting mission to all the others. So counterinsurgency, unconventional warfare, even direct action are all supported by special reconnaissance missions and tasks. At the point where I retired from the military, I then started working in the national security sector as a civilian contractor. And I saw the handwriting on the wall about China. As a matter of fact, I had always been suspicious about China ever since Nixon decided that he could coexist with China. And so I was very uncomfortable with that. And I saw their growing military, which, far exceeds national defense of their country. They had no threat except perhaps by the Russians. And that is very highly speculative. So why were they building their military up? So some years later, I attended a Special Forces Association convention at Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is right outside of Fort Bragg. And part of the program was we could hop on these tour buses and go out to Camp McCall and get the tour. Well, a lot had changed at Camp McCall. The physical structure was just incredible. I mean, in my day, you were lucky to live in, inhabit a tent or a shelter half. And you could feel fortunate in doing that. But now they've got all these buildings, and the only building that they actually had at Camp McCall that wasn't a tent was a classroom and office space for the cadre. All the students were housed in tents. That had all changed. At the wrap up of the tour, I went up to talk to this major who had given us a canned briefing at the end of that. And I had with me about 10, 20-page tactics and techniques bulletin, if you will. And I said, I've seen some of your training. I think you could, make it, you ought to take a look at these TTPs and consider injecting those into the curriculum. He backed off and said, "Not my job, not my job," and said that I needed to go to the schoolhouse in order to submit this document. And I said, all right, who do I talk to at the schoolhouse? Well, it was another major. And I asked for his contact information, and he was very reluctant to give it to me. I finally got an email address for the guy. After pressuring this major at Camp McCall, and I sent him 2 emails, and he didn't even give me the courtesy of a response, which really pissed me off. And that caused me to decide to write the book. And because I felt, even though these ought to be close hold tactics and techniques and procedures that should reside within the special operations community, they're not going to get into the hands of the special operations community unless it's published. And if U.S. SOCOM or U.S. Army SOCOM wasn't going to publish it, then I was going to do it because I felt it needed to get into the hands of the troops. So I'm kind of grateful that it got picked up by a publisher, and it did get some renown in certain circles. But of course, the book is directed towards a very narrow target population. So it didn't get widely circulated enough to suit my fancy. But as you might note in the introductory portion of the book, I was, bewailing the fact that all this information had bled out. It was no longer available except within this one book. It's the only book that I know of that has collected all the TTPs from the SOG experience. So I've been on a campaign ever since to try and get an established course for special reconnaissance and at a minimum, and jungle operations beyond that. And no one's listening, or very few people are listening. There's been some movement recently because of change of administrations and change of the direction of the Defense Department, change in leadership. But it's embarrassing for me to know that even though there's a national security strategy that's been out since 2022 that acknowledges China as the pacing threat for the United States, and no one has undertaken to reestablish a jungle operations training facility. We used to have one in Panama, and Jimmy Carter decided to give the canal and the military installations around it to the Panamanians. And one of those installations was the Jungle Operations Training Center. And that's gone. It's been gone for decades. And no one thought, you didn't have to wait until 2022 to understand that the Chinese were representing a threat. There's a lot of places in the world where there's rainforest and jungle where we're facing national security threats, and still no one did anything about it to establish a course.
So would it be an idea then to have you come back and do a part two, and then maybe I might invite one of your peer groups who has the same thoughts about this, and then you guys can talk, and then we can put it out there for the public to watch, and hopefully it gets into the right hands.
I would appreciate that very much. In the course of that conversation, I'll also tell you what's afoot now, but it's grinding very slowly, much too slowly. And the Chinese are in a position where they've got to move. They've got to do something uh, because of the state of their economy, the population bomb that they established for themselves. All these things that are going to that are going to compel the People's Republic of China to do something to stave off what is currently inevitable in the absence of action. So, yes, I'd be happy to come back and speak to you again.
That would be great, because then there'll be two of you that both have the same view, and you're both well known, and I think that would be the best. I mean, the more name drops that we can have, and with your connections and mine as well, we can get this out there. So hopefully we'll go in the right hands, and if we do nothing, then nothing happens, right? So we all have to do our part.
Yeah, consider that we're bold enough to act, whereas others are shy to
Ah,
do so. So,
okay, well, for today, thank you very much. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to end the public thing. And it was kind of a humorous story that the first interview that I did, I pressed end and it closed down the whole thing. And I didn't have a chance to, say to the guest, thank you very much for coming on. And I felt terrible. So that's why now at the end, I always say, just hang on. So,
okay,
but we'll get you on again soon, and I'll talk to the other gentleman and see when he's free. So thank you again, Ed, for coming on.
very good. Appreciate it very much.